Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to BiblioTech on Air, BiblioTech's official podcast. I'm Rosanna.
I'm Lewis.
And today we have a special guest with us. Here we have Eduardo Eddie Vega, Poet Laureate of San Antonio. All right, so just a quick little blurb before we get into the official interview. Like I just mentioned, he is the Poet Laureate of San Antonio for 2024 through 2027, a teacher of Holy Cross at San Antonio. Has published several full-length works, which we're going to be talking about in just a bit, and also founded the Mouth Dakota Poetry Project, which is going to be open to people of all ages, experience levels, just a fun little thing that we're also going to be talking about in just a bit. So with that said, thank you very much for joining us today, Eddie.
Thank you for having me.
An absolute pleasure to have you on.
Yeah. So we're going to jump right into some of the questions we have prepared. So, as we kind of said, you are a well-established poet, enough to become a laureate. And we wanted to ask your journey through, like, discovering that you liked poetry, that you liked writing poetry. How did that all start with you?
Sure. I tell a lot of people that I first started writing poems to my mom because it was Mother's Day or her birthday, and I needed to get her something. And I didn't really have an allowance. Mm-hmm. So I would write her a little poem and maybe steal some flowers from the neighbors.
Oh.
Yeah.
And then get her breakfast, which was like cereal, right? Mm-hmm. So I couldn't cook anything. And even then I had to learn how to prepare cereal because you can't just, my mother did not like soggy cereal. I found out that early on you had to give her a bowl of some cereal and then the milk on the side.
Absolutely.
And then the poem next to that saying nice things about her.
Yeah.
And that's where it started. You know, I wrote probably through middle school, through high school. I wrote, but it was not cool to be a poet. So, and in college, I think a few more people knew that I was writing. And I just been writing on and off. I loved the poetic aspects, I guess. And when I think in my mid 30s, I got a lot more serious about it. And I went to open mics. I wrote more. I started going to Puro Slam on Tuesdays. And that just really took off. You know, it was more and more writing, more and more opportunities to write, more things to write about. Mm-hmm. And then published a book.
Yeah.
And published another one. And published another one. So that's where we are now.
That's quite a hurdle because, you know, like you said, going from like middle school and high school where it wasn't cool to be a poet to finally being able to be like, I'm going to put myself out here and just do this because I sincerely like it. How did that transition go?
Oh, that's an interesting question. I think it just became, you know what it took? It took somebody else to say, you're a poet, aren't you? Mm. And to recognize that. And out of nowhere, I was working at a high school and it was one of these events, kind of a little get-together of teachers and parents. And next to another teacher who turns out was, you know, a great poet in the city, Jesse Cardona, who just out of nowhere, I don't know how or why, but he says, are you a poet? Like just kind of asked. Mm-hmm. And I said, yes. And then it took him, he took me to an open mic. He kind of like dragged me out there saying, you can do this. Go ahead. Go read. And then liking what I read and critiquing here and there and in his own way without like discouraging.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's what it took. It took somebody else to say, oh, you do this, don't you?
Yeah. It is really, it is always such a validating feeling of just like, you're like, yeah, I'm a hobbyist. I do these things on the side, but it doesn't really like mean much for somebody, especially someone who is also an established poet in your community to look at that and be like, no, you've got something here and you would do well to follow it. That's always such an encouraging feeling. That is really all it takes sometimes just to get the ball rolling on that.
For sure. Yeah.
And that's fantastic. I'm glad that was such like an encouraging push. Mm-hmm. So you had mentioned before that you have a few published books.
Sure.
And you have two published full-length collections, Chichar of Chorus and Somos Nopales. And what was sort of the creative process of putting these books together? And was there any particular inspiration behind them? I know we had talked about the cover kind of being a serendipitous situation. Yeah. So if you want to talk about all that.
Sure. Well, Chicharra Chorus is kind of like basically all the poems that I had up until that part of my life. So it feels to me a little bit like a hodgepodge of poetry. Also, I was going through divorce, so there's that was going on in my mind. So the poems aren't all happy, right? And it really just brought everything together. And I had been trying to get a book together for a long time, and I actually kind of had given up on it. And I sent one more manuscript out. This time it was to Flower Song Press, and they said, "Yes, we'll take your book."
Nice.
So that started. So I think it was May of 2019 when that one was published. And with Somos Nopales, it was a little bit different because like once you've got one book out there, the second one's a little bit easier. And I had been writing since then. Maybe at the same time I was writing some of the poems for Chicharra Chorus. But Somos Nopales is really about Mexican American identity. It's about being the son of a Mexican immigrant. It's about growing up in South Texas. So there's a deeper focus, whereas Chicharra Chorus was just like, this is my life. This one was about all of these other things. So it's actually divided up into some chapters of like, you know, of being part of the Nepantla, right? Nepantla is the middle ground, right? And the not here but not there. And that's kind of where we are in South Texas. We're the United States of America, but we're also Mexico. You know,
Yeah.
We're not really either, but we're both. So it's that middleness that is the reason why we call this part of the Nepantla. So my chapters, for example, like if I could get to opening chapters up, right? I've got what's called Spirit of the Nepantlero. Then I've got Geography of the Nepantlero. The geography are all like places in that I've seen. Everything from actual places like my elementary school to just this South Texas that really doesn't have like a beginning or an end. Places in San Antonio like Breckenridge Park and Nogalito Street. And then I've got Nuevos Nepantleros, and that's really about some of the immigrants that I've encountered. And then I've got what I call heroes, and these are people of the Nepantla that I read about. So everyone from like the Paleta Man to one of my grandmothers.
Very nice.
It's all kind of in there. And then in between, I do have another book. It's called Así Es How We Talk. And that one I put together with a Luminaria grant, because I was a Luminaria grantee a few years ago. And that book is poems written by South Texans, all in Spanglish. And I define South Texas as like San Antonio, south of the valley, and then Laredo and Corpus and everywhere in between. And the poets have to either be from there or had a tie to that place. And each writing in what we call our native tongue, which is both English and Spanish, a Spanglish or a Tejano or Tex-Mex, whatever you want to call it. But it's all written in that because I thought that was important to preserve and also to mark as being our own language. And people, because some people say it's either English or it's Spanish, but it's not both.
Right.
And I say, no, this is how we talk.
Yeah. I think that there's such a beauty in being able to explore, like you said, that middle ground, something where like you're never just from one place or the other. You do exist in what people would consider a middle ground. And I was looking into a bit of a few of the poetry readings that you've done on your website, which by the way, check them out. But I was looking at, I believe it was This Poem Is Not For You, the recording that you did in Houston. And you have those lines where you're talking about people who are like, why do you put so much of your poems in Spanish? Can't you just choose one or the other?
Yeah.
You know, and I think that just being able to explore the fact that both of them are a part of you, I feel like that means a lot to a lot of people, especially with your status as a poet laureate for San Antonio, where a lot of people feel that sort of way about their cultural identity.
Yeah. And that poem is not in the collection, but it's really like the reason for the collection. Because, you know, and it's called I Didn't Write This Poem For You. And that was a line that came out of my mouth when I was talking to somebody about this experience of being told I had too much Spanish in one of my poems, to going to somewhere, speaking to poets who are not from South Texas, who was amazed that I could do poetry in two languages. Whereas to me, that was just normal. and I didn't think anything of it. And he was like, "That's awesome. You can do poems in 2 languages."
Yeah.
And in that conversation somewhere, I said, I wrote this poem once, and somebody told me I had too much Spanish, and I thought about it, and I didn't write it for them. I wrote it for me.
Yeah.
And then I wrote that line down, and that's where that poem and that thought, and we kind of like as Mexican Americans, we kind of get it from both sides. Our cousins think that we're not Mexican enough, and that that our Spanish is affected and our Spanish is imperfect, and that's true. And then on the other side, you've got the Academy, society, whoever it was, who would say, you don't talk American enough, or not. And I'm like, you know what? I find it's kind of like the idea accepting the fact that I'm a poet. Well, it's accepting the fact that this is who I am, this is how I talk, or this is who we are, this is how we communicate.
Yeah.
That's such a good comparison too. Like, you literally got it from both ends of the spectrums through your poetry. Like, this is amazing. You can do that. And why would you write that? But then comparing that to, how that's a very valid thing for a lot of people in their families, that kind of lack of awareness for that intersectionality,
Totally. Intersectionality, yes.
For sure. And I kind of touched on how much it means for that sort of poetry to be kind of like, put on a pedestal is not the phrase I'm looking for, to be highlighted, I guess, through you becoming San Antonio's Poet Laureate for 2024 to 2027, like how valuable that message can be to be spread out to people, especially in this area. But how did you kind of come into the role of becoming the Poet Laureate for that period?
Sure. Every city is different in the way that they acquire or uplift a Poet Laureate. In our city, it's a nomination process, so I didn't apply. I was nominated by several people, and there's that nomination process includes like several things that they had to get. They had to get my resume, of course, a list of my works, samples of my works, a recommendation from an arts organization or a community organization of some sort. And then that went to a committee of outside poets, because when they first put this together, they didn't want it to have like this system where it was kind of like nepotism or something. People just kept nominating each other, and then there'd be like a pool of Poets Laureate, and it wouldn't be fair.
Right.
So they sent it out first, and then after that, they sent the recommendations from that committee over to some previous Poets Laureate here in the city. Now we have, there are 6 before me, so now there's a group of people who understand not just what the committee of outsiders knows about these poets, but what our community knows about these poets, and what's important about that.
So you also do you run it, or is it something that you've kind of taken over, the Mouth Dakota Poetry Project?
No, I run that. Yeah.
Very nice.
Yeah.
And you started it during the pandemic. Was COVID a motivating factor for starting it, or was it kind of just something you were already planning on doing?
Like
and
in spite of COVID.
Yeah, it just so happened to come about.
I guess it started towards the tail end of the lockdown. And I had always wanted to have my own open mic, because I'd been to a lot of open mics, right? And I thought it was time for me to strike out and be on my own and doing one myself, doing it the way I wanted to do it. Not say that the others are bad or whatever or different. It's just I kind of wanted one that was more open to people of all ages, more open to people of all sorts of poetic experiences. There had kind of been a void, because the longest running open mic in the city, the Sun Poet Society, had already kind of closed shop during the pandemic. So I kind of saw myself as trying to fill that space. And I think we've done a pretty good job with it. At first it was weekly, but that's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So now it's like
Fair.
every other week, first and third Sundays. I had started out on a Wednesday at another spot. And then that spot didn't work out. They kind of closed us off on Cinco de Mayo. And I called up, Kent Oliver over at the Dakota Eastside Ice House on that day. And I said, hey, I've been left without a location for my open mic. He said, come right over. And then that day he said, why don't you do this more regularly here? So he invited me to be there. We chose Sunday. And then Jason Gossard, a.k.a. Shaggy, who was the slam master for Poodle Slam, he's actually the one who came up with the name. He says, why didn't you call it Mouth Dakota? Because we were at the Dakota.
That's fantastic.
Right? And mouth rhymes with south, so it's kind of a little trick on that. So and then he said you got to call it like a project because it gives it a different vibe. And I'm like, yeah, we call it a poetry project. So it's the Mouth Dakota Poetry Project, which really is a lot of words if you want to be on Twitter or on Instagram.
Yeah.
Like that. So
yeah, it does kind of it lends a different air to it than like poetry slam. I feel like, at least personally, I feel like I've seen people who kind of treat the phrase like poetry slam as like very like pretentious almost. And I'm like,
that's interesting.
I know, right? I don't understand it fully, but like I feel like kind of having it be called like a project in a way, it does also, not to say that people calling things a poetry slam is a bad thing at all, because I don't even personally see why people say that. But the project thing, I feel like it does lend an air of like, this is still something that as a community is great that we have, that we're putting on, and making sure that it's more accessible to, like you said, like a wider age range. I know a few poetry nights in the city are like at bars and stuff, so it's like 21 up. And I think that making it kind of an open place for that, for more age groups is honestly, I feel like that's a good way to make poetry a bit more accessible and appealing to people.
Right.
Definitely welcoming too.
Welcoming,
For sure.
Yeah. So a slam is actually a competition. So you could take any type of poem into a slam, and you're actually competing for cash and prizes against other poets.
Okay.
And there is a bit of an edge to it because it's performance art. So when you say, that it's a little pretentious, it's kind of come a long way, because when slam first started, the academic poets, the book poets, those kind of poets look down on the slam or the spoken word scene. It wasn't really totally accepted. And in the last, I'd say 10, 15 years, it's kind of like come up to be part and accepted by the rest of the poetry community. But for a long time, if you did slam, if you were in like an MFA program somewhere and they saw that you were doing slam, they would be like, why are you doing that? That's not necessary. Go write a poem, write a real poem, kind of.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So there's this little, and I think that there's something that you hit earlier about poetry, or about the kind of the work that I want to do, is I want it to be accessible. I want people to be able to get my poetry and feel my poetry, understand my poetry, and it not be some elevated art where I have words that only certain people can understand, or themes that only certain people or even care about. I want it to be like the person on the street can understand me and my words and my themes. That's more of the goal.
Yeah, and I feel like that has the room to like inspire a lot of people. I won't go way into it, but like I know that literally going to a poetry night when I was in high school was something that made me discover something about myself, that like literally if I had not gone that night, if that person had dressed it up a bit more and I had been kind of like more cynical about it, I probably would have never like started questioning something that, like, not to be like ultra vague about it, but like, it helped me a lot. And I think that making poetry so accessible and making people realize that they could write it if they want and have that outlet is so important. Yeah.
And as far as like, so going back to how you definitely try to promote having your poetry in both English and Spanish, do you get a lot of Spanish speakers at your poetry night?
No, not hardly.
Oh wow.
I mean, I'm not sure why or why not. Maybe it's the location that we are. Maybe it's the clientele of the Dakota. Maybe it's where I'm telling people. Maybe they haven't accessed that. Maybe they just don't know. But we don't really get that. I know that there's a community of Spanish-speaking poets in San Antonio, because I've heard that they exist. I don't know where they're at exactly. I've met one or two. But yeah, we don't have like exclusively Spanish poets. We have a lot that speak the Tex-Mex or who sprinkle some Spanish in with their English. We have a lot of those. But as far as like poems in Spanish, we've had very, very few. I think we've had more poems in Korean than we have had in Spanish.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. That's still
not
really
a whole lot
cool,
of those
yeah.
either. But like,
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is every first and third Sunday at
at the Dakota,
I almost just called it the Mouth Dakota. At the Dakota. At what time usually?
at 5 p.m.
At 5 p.m. Bring your best poems And if you want to sprinkle in some Spanish, or you want it to be fully in Spanish, go for it.
Or Korean.
And
or
Korean.
or we've had
Yeah.
somebody sprinkled in. What did they sprinkle in? I think like Nahuatl. We sprinkled
cool.
in some Japanese here and there, Vietnamese. We've had a little bit of everything. People have kind of like brought into that, or
Yeah.
be your authentic self.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
So it's just a big melting pot for people interested in poetry.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
so
Come
cool.
on over.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. So I feel like we've touched on this like in a few different ways, but kind of more directly. If you had any advice to give anybody who's starting out writing poetry, who is already into poetry, but still kind of fighting their footing, what would you want to say to them?
I think that a lot of poets feel restrained by certain conventions or rules. So I just say write. Just write.
Mm-hmm.
Write. But then go back and edit. Go back and look at it. Don't just write something and think, okay, it's done. Let me go read it on a microphone. Let me go submit it. No, you've got to work at it a little bit, But first and foremost, or always just be writing about everything and anything and see what pops up. I've got my notes app is full of lines that some might I have to go back and look at it and might become a poem someday. My journals have other just random thoughts that at some point might become a poem. But yeah, I just say just keep writing, no matter where you're at or what you're doing. Just write.
Yeah, absolutely. Short and sweet, but also like for sure. Like
Yeah.
just it's sometimes what you have to do is you have to put pen on paper, or in many cases, fingers on notes app.
Yeah, exactly.
That's awesome.
It's like when I write a lot of haiku, and when I teach haiku, people think, well, it's 575, it's 17 syllables, it's got to be, and modern American contemporary whatever haiku, the only rule is 17 syllables or less. So that's already one rule you don't have to worry about is a 575.
Oh.
But the other thing is when you're writing it, just write your thoughts out and don't be constrained by, oh, it's got to be 5 syllables. Oh, it's got to be 7 syllables.
Mm-hmm.
Don't just write all the lines, all your words out, then go back and count your syllables and then cut or add or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And it should be messy. It should look like a really messy piece of paper with all these slashes and dot marks on top of syllables and whatever. And then after you've done all that cutting or adding, write it nice and neat under there, and then you've got your poem.
Yeah, that's cool. You just have the process, like the thought process out on paper.
Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't know that about haikus. I thought it was very like rigid like that too.
Yeah.
That's cool.
What about for like writer's block? What would be your advice for that? Because I'm sure
There's-
that's something very.
There's like I don't necessarily subscribe to a writer's block. I mean, I guess about being blocked. Oh, I can't write right now. I can't. There's always something to write about, and it might not be what you think you need to be writing about, but just write it down. And there's people who write every day.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there was I'm forgetting this poet's name. I think it was William Stafford, who was asked, you write a poem every day. What if you ever write a bad poem? And he said, I lower my standards.
Yep.
Just keep writing. And what you write might not be a poem. But my cheats are the HEB parking lot, the taqueria I'm going to, the coffee shop I'm at, just listening to people's conversations, eavesdropping, and people say amazing things every day. They're talking about just either very real things or very strange things, and just steal from them. Just write down what they've said or what they're talking about, and that's my trick for not having something to write about. There's
like,
always something going on.
It's like people watching, but yeah,
People listening.
people
Yes.
listening. I used to work at HEB, and there were times where I was about to go into work, and I felt so strongly about the fact that I did not want to go into work that I would write a lot of my poetry in the HEB parking lot before I was about to be late. So I thought that's where you're going with that, but no. As someone who has worked there, you do absolutely hear the absolute strangest things you've ever heard in your entire life there, and it is inspiring.
It is inspiring. And it's not people aren't trying to like put on airs or make something up. No, this is very, very real conversations.
Yeah.
Like, you better touch this phone right now or you're going to give it ojo and I'm going to have to mess you up. So come touch my phone. I heard this lady say that once when I was trying to get out of the car, and I was like, I'm writing this down.
Yeah, that's already poetry.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. So last question. We ask all of our interviewees this, but what are you currently reading, watching, listening to?
Ooh, gosh. Okay. So I'm reading like several books at once because I have a very short attention span. And some of them are poetry. Some, Wounded Sparrows is Octavio Quintanilla's book. So I'm leafing through that and reading that. There was a book I picked up at an airport about pirates, past and present, and it just looked interesting. So I've been reading that just because, just to like get my mind off regular things. And so that's another thing that I'm reading. Andrew Porter from Trinity. He's a professor at Trinity, but he's also a writer, and he has a new book, a new novel out that we just picked up last week when he released it on Thursday, I think, or Wednesday or Thursday, whenever that was. And anyway, that's he read from it, and we loved it. My wife and I loved it. So she's reading it first, but it's my book, so I'm gonna pick it up, take it from her at some point and read it too. What am I watching? My wife and I sit down and watch a lot of stuff together. So of course we've got to get through The White Lotus because we kind of missed a few episodes. We got to get back to that. And I think that's the one we're watching. Yesterday I spent a lot of time watching Doctor Who because it was a marathon.
Nice. Which season?
No, there was a marathon of Easter episodes.
Ooh,
so I kind of just watched several of them at once. And what was it watching?
Listening to also.
Listening to. My favorite podcasts are Wait, Don't Tell Me, the NPR News Quiz. And then I also listen to The Best of Our Knowledge, which is also NPR. They're all NPR based. To The Best of Our Knowledge, and the pop culture one. It's Been a Minute.
That's what it's called? It's Been a Minute?
Yes.
I need to look these up. I only listen to like a few podcasts, and I love like trivia / like informational stuff like that. I gotta look that up.
Yeah, this one, the Wait, Don't Tell Me, is actually like News. It's kind of like, think of like the Daily Show, but like on a weekly end with it's more comedy than the satire, I guess, that you find on the Daily Show.
Gotcha. Cool. Thank you so much.
Sure.
It's good that you have a very like wide breadth of things that you're also like reading, listening to, all that jazz. I feel like that keeps the mind busy for sure.
Yes, yeah, I gotta keep the mind busy.
All right, everyone. So once again, that was Eddie Vega, Poet Laureate of San Antonio. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Seriously.
Thank you for having me.
And where can our listeners and viewers find you if they want to read more of your poetry or just kind of keep up with you?
Sure. My books are at Flower Song Press, so I think it's flowersongpress.com. I have a website, tacopoet.com, because that's my nickname. I'm the Taco Poet of Texas. And my books are actually there's a link from there to my publisher to get books. You can also find me at the Dakota every first and third Sunday at 5 p.m. And I guess if on social media at El Tlacolico, that's ELTACOLICO, and I put the events that I'm going to be at on there because it's National Poetry Month, so I've been pretty busy, and there's still a few more things, a few more places that I got to be at and to be sharing my poetry with.
Very nice, very nice. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
All right, well that's going to wrap it up for us here at BiblioTech On Air. Thanks again, and make sure you check out all of Eddie's stuff. But yeah, that's it for us. I'm Rosanna.
I'm Lewis.
And we'll catch you on the next episode. Bye.